Hello and welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. In this edition, we're going to take a hard look at a subject that doesn't feature too often in business channels, the proposed National Minerals Policy. The new policy, the third policy in the post-reform period after NMP 1993 and 2008, is currently being finalized and is expected to be announced in the next few weeks. Given that the mining sector is still languishing, latest GDP numbers show the sector grew by just 0.1% in the first quarter of this fiscal, even as the economy grew 8.2%. What can the new policy do differently from the earlier 2008 policy to ensure faster growth and sustainable growth in the sector? How can we capitalize on our abundant mineral wealth without endangering the environment and the livelihoods of those who live in these mineral-rich areas? Joining me in discussion are two experts in the field, S. Vijay Kumar, former Secretary Mining, Government of India, and presently a fellow at TERI, the Delhi-based Energy and Resources Institute, and Seshagiri Rao, Joint MD and Group CFO, JSW Steel, one of the largest steel producers in the country. Let me start with you, Vijay Kumar. Since you were at the helm of affairs in the mining ministry during a particularly difficult period, where and why did NMP 2008 fall short? Because only if one knows the minuses of the earlier policy will we be able to draft a better policy now. And just for the benefit of our viewers, most of whom would be more familiar with the antics of the stock market and the rupee and so on, just let me read out the objectives of NMP 2008. To usher in greater liberalization in the private sector involvement, widen the scope of the regulatory framework by shifting the focus from conventional areas of managing mineral concession systems in order to attract capital and technology from new sources. You of course are very familiar, so that was only for the benefit of our viewers. So what were the minuses of 2008 policy?
Well, Mythili, I must go a little further back. In the post-independence era, mining was primarily done by PSUs, and it was at that time, that was the time when, under the industrial policy resolution, the PSUs were occupying the commanding heights of the economy. Obviously, the major, metal making companies in steel and aluminum came up during that period. They had to have mines, and so PSUs were allotted the mines. Then after liberalization in 1991, for the first time, there was a feeling that the private sector needs really to come into this sector, because that's the way it is in all other countries, and there are many advantages in private sector coming in. They bring in new capital, they bring in technology, they bring in knowledge, and so the 1993 policy was framed primarily with the intention of attracting private investment and private sector participation in mining and exploration. The 1993 policy did not attract capital and private capital in exploration and to some extent in mining, and therefore, the Hoda committee was set up under the chairmanship of Mr. Hoda, who was then a member of the Planning Commission, and based on the Hoda committee recommendations, the 2008 policy came up. The 2008 policy squarely looked at the issue of exploration. Mining was not seen as such a big problem, because once you have the resources, it's a question of allocating the resources in a way that enable the resources to be used to actually make the metal. But exploration was a key, and exploration was not picking up, and the 2008 policy actually tried to bring in new systems and mechanisms in order to incentivize exploration, in order to incentivize foreign direct investment, and in particular in order to incentivize risk and venture capital into exploration.
Mr. Rao, what is your assessment? I think Vijay has given us a very good background of why we had the 2008 policy, but what was really wrong with the 2008 policy in your mind?
When the policy was introduced in 2008, as rightly mentioned, the exploration activity is one area which has not picked up in the private sector. The second point which has come up during the discussion in the Supreme Court is that there was a very transformational amendment which has been done in the year 2015, that the natural resources will be allocated only through auction route. So there is illegal mining, there is no intergenerational equity, there is no exploration from the private sector. Number 3 is auction of mines has to be done not by grant. When the changes have happened from 2008 to 2018, there is a need definitely to have a new policy, mining policy. I think this draft addresses some of the issues in my view, which I can discuss in 5 major pillars on which the new mineral policy is framed or is drafted right now.
Okay. We'll just go into the details a little later, but as Vijay, as Mr. Rao mentioned, much has changed and there are many things in the new mineral policy should take into account. But the fact is that all development involves trade-offs, and these are particularly stark when it comes to minerals, since most of the mineral wealth is situated in areas under forest cover and inhabited by tribals or underprivileged communities. The Mineral Development Foundation was supposed to address the issue of these communities who are often displaced by these projects, but they haven't really gained from the mineral boom as such. How far has the fund addressed these issues, and has it reduced the resistance to these projects, Vijay?
Well, before I get into that, I just want to add one small thing to what Mr. Rao said. You see, in 2008, when the policy was framed, the policy came first, and the act for the sector, which is called the Mines and Minerals Development Regulation Act 1957, was amended subsequently, or was sought to be amended subsequently, or replaced by a new act. Now we have another situation where the amendment to the Mines and Minerals Development Regulation Act has taken place in 2015, as Mr. Rao says, and the effort now is actually to align the policy with the law. Both are possible. It's possible to align the law with the policy, it's possible to align the policy with the law. In this particular case, very rightly, as been mentioned, the effort is to align it with the law. But at the same time, as Mr. Rao said, the Supreme Court is in the case in Orissa in August 2017 said that there is a lot of illegal mining. It appears the 2008 policy has failed. It appears that it needs to be relooked. Therefore, central government should do so and give a report, and which is why the central government is looking at it. Of course, it's a different matter whether it's a policy failure that is causing illegal mining or a regulatory and enforcement failure, but be that as it may, that's the reason for it. Now, coming to the District Mineral Foundation issue. So, this was an idea which actually came out of the 2008 policy. There was a lot of consensus that something needs to be done so that local populations in mining areas who are at the losing end of the spectrum as a result of mining activity need to be compensated and need actually to be better off as a result of the mining than worse off. So, in the law that was amended in 2015, 30% of the amount equal to royalty was given to the district from where that royalty was generated through the mining process.
Has that reduced opposition from the communities?
No, but the problem is that because it is just 2 years, systems are still being put in place, and learnings are still taking place.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. But Mr. Rao, what are the reasons to your mind for the lack of investment in the private sector? Are they germane to the mining sector, or are they just part of the overall slowdown that we are seeing in investment in the country? Because government has relaxed many of the end-use restrictions, etc., and made it easier for investment, but still that doesn't seem to be happening, Mr. Rao.
Yeah, I agree with you, because after the amendment to the MMDR bill in the year 2015, particularly the non-fuel mining concessions which have been auctioned, maybe 45 to 50 mines which have been auctioned, only 2 or 3 mines have become operational. So, that means there is some gap in what the intention in the mining policy either 2018 or 2008, and what is happening on the ground. There is something which we need to address. That is the reason why we are not seeing the pace at which the minerals are required by the downstream units vis-a-vis what is happening on the ground.
So, what is this gap due to? Very briefly, if you could tell me.
Yes. The gap here is after the mining concessions are auctioned, then the approvals is one. One is, if you see the objective or the vision of the draft mining policy of 2018, that is ease of doing business, and in a time bound manner the approvals are required to be given. Whereas, when the mine is auctioned, whatever approvals that were available earlier, those approvals, if they have not expired, is there any seamless transfer of those approvals to the new lessee? That is one area which we find problems, particularly in the state of Karnataka, where category C mines were there, which were operating earlier, cancelled by the Supreme Court. When the new lessee gets it in the auction, and if we want to restart the operations, these approvals transfer is taking time. That is one. Number two, if the approvals already expired, if we have to get the new approvals For the same mine which was operational earlier, the process involved in getting the clearances, I think, is very lengthy. That is also taking time. The third area which I find is the afforestation land, which we have to give CA land, which we call. We have to offer, if it is a forest land where the mines are allocated, then we have to give alternate land. So that identification and transfer of land from revenue to the forest department is again another very, very lengthy process which we are finding. That is the responsibility on the lessee.
Okay, and
I think ease of doing business and the approvals is one area I think something is required to be done, aligning with the policy, the processes and the current act.
Okay, yes, in fact, that's true of India in all sectors really, but I'm afraid it's time for us to slip into a very short break. So please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and as I said in my introduction, we're discussing a topic that you seldom hear on television, the proposed National Minerals Policy, precisely because it's an issue which in fact affects many, many lives. And I have with me two experts in the field, Vijay Kumar and Mr. Seshagiri Rao. Vijay, before the break, we were talking about the issues in mining, and one thing that one frequently hears in the context of mining is the phrase sustainable mining, and that this is critical for the long-term growth of the economy. What does that really mean? Because sometimes companies win mines in auctions, and later they are told that there is it passes through some ecologically fragile area, etc. So, is there a case for getting all the environmental clearances first and then doing the auction, Vijay Kumar?
Well, Mythili, this is actually at the heart of the problem. And the 2008 policy failed mainly because the concessions could not actually often come into the shape of mining on the ground. A lot of time was taken in getting approvals for land acquisition or for forest clearance or for environmental clearance. And I fear that unless something is done, this may be repeated even if the mines are auctioned. The auctioning of the mine is possibly a more transparent policy than the earlier allotment processes, because earlier it was given first in time, and often it was given by processes not so well known, and auction is clearly more transparent. It also adds more revenue to the government. But the problem which is related to the capacity of the states and of the central government to process the issues for grant of approvals, particularly environmental approval. One of the things being proposed is that when mines are auctioned, the environmental approvals are pre-taken, and the mine that is given to the highest bidder already contains the forest and environmental approvals. Now, actually, in my view, the forest approval can more or less be taken as granted as prior to the mining, because it involves enumeration of trees and computing of the value of the trees and the compensatory afforestation cost and the net present value. It is independent of who wins the bid. But in the case of environmental clearance, I would be very surprised if it's possible to do it earlier, because the environmental clearance actually based on the mining method proposed by the bidder. So, only he will actually, when he prepares a mining plan for the mine period, it's on that basis that the environmental clearance is given, and an environment management plan actually forms part of the mining plan. So, you cannot prejudge and put in place an environment management plan unless a mining plan is there. So, I fear that unless something drastic is done to reduce the time limit within which the environmental clearances are given, we may actually see 2 or 3 years go by between the successful bid and actual opening of the mine.
Well, 2 to 3 years doesn't seem so bad, but actually, Mr. Rao, you in fact mentioned the gap between policy and what happens on the ground. And would you agree that POSCO perhaps was a classic example of what happens? Vijay spoke of 2 to 3 years, but here we had a company which waited for more than a decade and finally exited. What can one do? Will private investors, again foreign investors, look at coming into India after the experience of POSCO, and where did we go wrong in that?
Yeah, that's when we prepare a policy, I think it has a very laudable objectives, but if the law is not changed and the processes are not in line with what the policy is, I think there is always gap. For instance, even 2018 mining policy, if somebody examines, it clearly says that the minerals are very important for the core sectors of the economy. And then the development, regulation and exploitation and the use of these mineral resources are to be aligned with the overall objectives of the economy, objectives of the country for economic development. That is the vision of this mining policy. If it is so, that means value addition within the country and the security of the minerals for downstream units, not only for existing and future requirements, is one of the very important item or thrust which has to be given as far as the law is concerned. But when the auctions are done, if there is no earmarking for downstream units, if it is open for everybody including traders, then this objective is not achieved in that regard, when there is a huge requirement of the minerals in India and over 3 lakh crores of either minerals or mineral related goods are imported into India, there is a need to achieve this objective and change the law. That is one important point which I wanted to highlight. The second important point is the objective of policy once again says in a fair and transparent manner we have to use the natural resources to subserve the common good. This is the point which is highlighted. And at that time they said if you want to give the mines or earmark the mines not through auction and give it to or earmark for state government, state government can allocate these mines or earmark these mines for any PSUs like NMDC or Coal India. If you wanted to do that, then there are two conditions which have been stipulated. One is for security reason, another is public interest. Today what is happening when there is so much of investment happening in the downstream unit by the private sector, and if the not in fair and transparent manner in the guise of public interest or in the name of some other reason, if these mines are earmarked for public sector, again it will take a very long time for making them operational. So therefore the law should clearly say what do you mean by public interest, what do you mean by security conditions under which these mines can be allocated to public sector instead of auctioning as given in the 2015 amendment. This is the second area which I see. I think law is required to be changed in line with the mining policy.
Oh, yes, indeed, but except that if law was very clear, where would the lawyers make their money? And Vijay Kumar, I think Mr. Rao mentioned also auction, and the fact is that the 2015 amendments to the Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Act virtually make auctions the only method of allocating mineral concessions at the prospecting and the mining stages. I know you have some very strong reservations on this, and that's quite at odds with the received wisdom in favor of auctions. So could you elaborate on why you think auctions are not necessarily the best, Vijay?
Yeah, well, 2-3 reasons. One is auction is conducted after a geological report is prepared which actually values the resource. The way the report is prepared is very crucial to determining the bidding process, and unless we have a very well structured and internationally accepted norm for valuing the resource for something, for instance, there is a process called the JORC, J-O-R-C. Unless some process like that is adopted, the valuations are likely to be subjective, and therefore the bid may also be subjective and not as transparent as would appear on the surface. The second issue related with auctions is the bidder has to pay an amount over and above the royalty. Now, there are actually two principles, alternate principles that are applicable to the mining sector. One is mining as a generator of revenue to the government. The other is mining as an engine of growth of the economy. Now, the 2008 policy is very clear that mining should be an engine of growth, because the minerals then produce metals which then go to industries which then prepare goods, and it actually starts investment cycle and GDP growth. But when the revenues are siphoned off, as it were, by the government at the mining stage itself, A, it leaves much less with the industry, and B, it then actually transfers the funds to the hands of the government to determine where the investments are going to be, whether it's in social sector or economic sector. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing has to be seen in the context, but certainly one of the problems it does leave less money in the hands of industry for expansion and diversification, and also may push up the costs, input costs to industry. The third issue, which is actually the crux of it, is we tend to concentrate on mining, but really it is exploration that is the key. It is the exploration horse that pulls a mining cart. if you do not explore and do not increase the resources that you know you have, there is a limit to how much mining you can do. What the auction process does is it actually disincentivizes exploration, because the world over the paradigm is whoever explores spends his money, he takes the risk, and it's a very high risk activity. And so unless we incentivize exploration, a time will come when we will run out of resources, because the remaining resources we will not know where they are. And so it's very important to get the exploration part of it right. And the law currently says that you may explore as much as you like, but that does not give you any mining rights. You have to bid, and that may not work, particularly if the exploration agency is a foreign agency which does not specialize in mining. Mining and exploration are two different specializations.
I'm sure much of what Vijay said must have been music to your ears, Mr. Rao, because there is the view that the mining sector, particularly in India, is one of the most highly taxed vis-a-vis its counterparts in the rest of the world. Companies pay not only royalty, but they also have to pay for the District Mineral Foundation, and neither of these can be set off under the GST, unlike in the case of other input taxes. What changes would you like to see as far as these aspects are concerned in the new policy that's coming up? Mr. Rao?
In the new policy, I think there is a paragraph on these issues about fiscal measures which are required for revving up the mining industry. Number one, financing of the mining industry itself, because if development of the mining, including exploration, if it has to be funded, there are very few banks who are willing to finance, excepting the mining equipment. So there is a need to facilitate the financing of the development of the mine and exploration activity. Then I think the activity will pick up. That is one. Number two is the taxes which are there today. They are the highest in India relative to any country. Either you take royalties or you take DMF or you take any other taxes which the mining companies or the downstream units which have to eventually bear, they are higher. And one important point, again there is a disconnect, is the mining concessions which have been granted earlier, they pay only royalty, whereas the mining concessions which are coming in the auction, they not only pay the royalties, but at the same time they also pay premium to the government based on the market price. So both together is quite substantial amounts which the lessee who gets the mine in the auction is incurring in this side. So therefore, which as a downstream unit player where we participate in the auction, what we have been representing is that the companies which are getting mines in the auction should pay a lesser amount relative to the person who got the mines in the grant route prior to the amendment. I think that will increase the competitiveness of the downstream units which are participating in the auction and paying the premium plus royalty and taxes. I think these two areas have to be looked at, in my view, to facilitate lower taxes. Lower taxes and also the financing of the development.
Okay, that seems a very logical demand, in fact. But we're running out of time, so I'm end with this last question to Vijay Kumar. Vijay, the fact is that the mining sector is really seen in poor light in India as polluting, environmentally degrading, often linked with illegal activities, the mining mafia and so on. What can we do to change that image? The Steel Secretary recently called upon the mining industry to work on removing all the misconceptions about mining. Very quickly, since we're running out of time, what can we do to change that conception?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The mining sector in India does not have a good reputation. It's partly because the laws are complex and very often disincentivizing, so people take shortcuts which they should not. A lot of the illegal mining that took place was because the laws did not favor a quick grant of concessions. Concession requests were held up for years and decades. As you said, POSCO, for instance, was held up for years, and in their case they brought in a new technology with which we are now deprived of. The most important thing is the capacity of the state level to properly regulate and manage the entire process. In most states, barring a few honorable exceptions, the State Directorate of Mining and Geology, their work is more related to collection of the royalties and revenues. And even the inspection of the mines is less done by the state government than by the central government's Indian Bureau of Mines. Actually, in most other jurisdictions, and that's how it should be here, the states who are actually receiving the revenues on account of the minerals, because they own the minerals, should actually take on the responsibility for properly policing the sector, because they have the records to know whether illegal mining is taking place, whether illegal transportation is taking place, whether improper practices, safety standards, health practices are taking place or not.
Well, yes, that's very true. In our country, implementation is always our weakest link. I'm afraid we'll have to end this discussion now, even though there's so much more to discuss about the new national mineral policy. I do hope the government will take heed of the words of wisdom coming both from Mr. Rao as well as Vijay Kumar. Thank you so much both of you for joining me in this discussion. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.